the reaction has really been strong, but it's also highlighted a lot of pain. Black South Africans have lots of pain. South Africans who are oppressed by a system that doesn't work for them experience pain, and we're seeing it play out in violent scenes. Yesterday at the University of Stellenbosch, we saw students being shamboked, we saw people involved in violent scuffles. Obviously, I can imagine, having met and spoken to you guys very briefly, but I can imagine that's not what you wanted. Violence was not a wanted outcome of this film. But here we are. This is what's happened. Would you be willing to comment on that?
I mean, I think. Do you want to take it?
No, you take it.
I mean, I think that, you know, when you make a film, you make it with an intention, right? And as Dan says, our intention was to bring about some sort of positive change, to get the ball rolling.
Some measurable change.
Some measurable change.
Yeah.
And you know, once it's like pushing a rock down a hill, and it's sort of, you try and get over that initial nurture, and then it keeps on rolling, and you can't really control where it goes. And with something like this, nothing we'd ever done before had gotten the amount of exposure that this had. We were so unprepared for it, and you start to get into these unforeseen consequences. When so many people see your video, there's bound to be people who interpret it in a different light than what you originally intended. And it does disappoint us that there is violence that might have been caused by our video. You know, it's not what we wanted. But at the same time, there's nothing really we could have done other than make the film as clear and explicit in its message as possible. And I think we spent a lot of time trying to do that, and I think we succeed in that regard, but you can never anticipate how people are going to interpret it or take it.
Dan, I want to go to you now.
Yeah.
One of the gentlemen that you interviewed during the video has allegedly been photographed as one of the men who instigated some of the shamboking that happened on campus yesterday. Obviously, at this point, I have to point out that this is unverified, and it's just News 24 viewers have actually pointed out the similarity in appearance of this gentleman in footage and in the actual video. Are you able to give us a comment on that?
So, as you say, it's unverified. There's footage that also just suggests that there was an extensive scuffle and like beatings up and racial slurs and all those sorts of things. But that's not the point, right? So the point is that anybody with any agenda can exploit any piece of footage or any piece of art for their self-serving agenda. We don't know if this was a political move by a political organization. We don't know if this was just anger. We don't know if this was premeditated or anything. The point is that our film has one very clear message, which is listen to how hard it is to be a black person at Stellenbosch. That's it. And so our film, that is the consequence. That's the narrative, that's the message, and that's what the overwhelming response has been. We never condone violence. We didn't create a film that creates violence such as that. Maybe it contributes to a climate where people are more willing to commit violence. That's plausible. But that's true of virtually any film. That's true of virtually any piece of art that is exploitable. So ultimately, we interviewed that individual, and he told incredibly real stories that you yourself have referenced, the one about being racially abused and having a beer poured on them for dancing with women in a bar. Irrespective of a later consequence, he was a victim of racial abuse and racial prejudice. And that was what our film was about, exposing racial abuse and racial prejudice. So if he did do that, it's horribly regrettable, and I wish that it hadn't happened. But to refer back to a statement that Open Stellenbosch put out yesterday, they also denounced it and said that they would never, ever, ever endorse or condone violence. And then they quoted Professor Jonathan Jansen, who said, who also doesn't condone violence, but he said, if there is a climate or set of conditions in which students or people are driven to the point where they feel like violence is necessary, you got to look at that. Because violence doesn't just flower out of anything at all. There's got to be a climate or set of conditions or paradigm on the ground which causes people to be driven to that point of desperation where they feel that they can't do anything else. And if our film helped to a certain extent expose that, we still don't condone violence. In fact, we deplore it and denounce it, but that's what you should be looking at.